I want to welcome you to Firecat First Friday. Some of you have been here before and some of you are new. We do Firecat First Friday, the first Friday of most months, and we cover topics of interest to people who are responsible for customer experiences, employee experiences, digital experiences, because that's what Firecat Studio does. We help companies design excellent experiences that get better results by better meeting the needs of the customers, employees, partners, prospects. We've got a heavy hitter lineup of consultants, and we also do user research and usability, because often the first step in designing an excellent experience is understanding who you're serving, what their needs are, what their beliefs are, and how they make decisions. So I have invited one of my favorite people that I met at a large financial services organization where we were both experience strategists. And that's folks who consulted in the entire enterprise for all types of experiences and helped each product group come up with their own experience strategy. Since then, Chuck Rohrig has moved on to be a senior experience owner for an insurance product, and he has folks reporting to him that are also experience owners, and has a couple of jobs posted if you want to do a lookup of him on LinkedIn. He is looking for more firepower. Chuck, do you want to give yourself a little bit better introduction?
That was phenomenal. No, thank you, Susan. And just on that last note, there are a lot of experience owner roles that are popping up now. And since I've been publicizing some of the openings on my team, I've been continuing to push those on sister teams. So that's been the most recent action on that space. So thanks for plugging that for me. So thanks for joining. To me, it's fun to talk about serious topics, but with a little bit of levity. But I don't know how much levity really to be garnered from 2020 beyond the memes and just thinking what else could there be after murder hornets. It just seems that zombies became a lot more plausible than they were originally. But the idea here in our chat today is to talk about the topic of decision making and in what lessons we can take away from 2020 and preparing for something like zombies, but and not just like for your customers, but the things that you're doing at work on behalf of your customers, and even some things that you may have been experiencing personally. We'll have a few polls in the chat today, so I don't have actually, I can probably pull up the chat, but the way that we'll handle that is just answer the questions in the chat, and we'll kind of just scan to see, what everyone's thoughts are on it. And so you might think, okay, there's plenty of zombie works out there. I mean, take your pick. I don't know if you're more of a Dawn of the Dead type of person or Shaun of the Dead. You could be a fan of both. I personally liked World War Z, but important that the book, not the movie. But what you can take away from this is really, we're not strangers to this idea of there being some kind of a pandemic that changes people and it's a big risk. But at the same time, like, there's a difference between that and how we actually behave. And one of the tweets I loved from last year was this idea that we were going to have to retire this expression of avoiding something like the plague, because in actual practice, we tend not to do that. And so in thinking on this, and there's a panel, there's a convention I like to go to where they have lots of different panels of different groups of people. And there was one that had these authors of post-apocalyptic fiction talking about 2020. I thought some of their comments were really interesting. One of them said, if I were to have written anything from 2020 in my books, it would have been too unbelievable and ridiculous. It just would have been absurd. I would never have thought to do certain things that came to light. And I thought that was funny, but also applicable when it comes to like taking lessons learned. It was certainly an unprecedented situation, and also like how how we reacted, we probably could not have predicted either. But what can we do about that to bring forward those insights and lessons learned? But also, like, there are probably other analogous situations that we can draw some insights from as well. But one thing is, when it comes to things like the zombies, the difference in a lot of these stories is that it moves quickly. Like, you see something spreading fast, it's highly lethal, and as much as COVID did spread rather quickly, it isn't exactly the same as what we see in the movies, which like causes a lot of knee-jerk reactions. Very different than from your house being on fire and you need to leave, as opposed to, well, I know that there's some work I need to do in my house, and maybe I'll get to it. But if there's any lesson learned, from 2020 from a zombie perspective, is move slow, which to a zombie, it's, I guess, on brand for them. So we're going to jump into our first poll, and reflecting back. There's going to be a lot of we'll dive into a lot of reflection here in our chat. But when you first saw if you just saw an emergency alert on your phone about sick people roaming, and this is kind of going back to zombies, what is your initial reaction? And be honest, and reflect back also on what your reaction was before. So just put into the chat, like, what is your what is your thinking there? So let me see if I can bring up the chat. Oh, yep, and Sherry, I wanted to have a zombie that was kind of like non-threatening, like, I'm not a big deal. 3, 1, 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 4. So it seems very spread. 3 seems to be, I think, very common. And so these options were chosen obviously on purpose to reinforce some of the things we're going to be diving into. There's certain biases that go into play with each of these. But we need to start from the fundamentals, like just very the basics on just decision making. So some of you, I'm sure many of you, are familiar with Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, and author of Thinking Fast and Slow, where he provides this framework of how we make decisions. And at a high level, just knowing we don't like making decisions. It's work. We hate it. And so to the extent that we're able to be efficient with our energy and with our, with our brains, we prioritize the easy decisions and do the heavy lifting later. And he describes it into system 1 and system 2. System 1 being more of that automated, very frequently widgets going through, and it's mostly subconscious. I don't even think how I'm going to get to work, that I'm on autopilot. I've got some kind of snacks I already, on my go-to, and I don't even give much thought to that. Whereas system 2 is more of the, I'm going to devote more of my mental energy into diving into this complicated question that might require some analysis, and those are aligned more to long-term goals. System 1 is just like short-term desires, what's going on today, and system 2 being a little bit more strategic, a little bit more long-term, effortful, but slow, which is fine. But what happens when something that's daily becomes a lot more difficult for us to understand? And so that's, going back to 2020, a lot of what we are facing, it's almost been a year, but some just normal decisions that we were facing weren't as easy to answer as they were before. So what happens in a scenario like that? So when you start thinking, having to devote a lot more mental energy into these questions on how often do I need to go get groceries? It might not be when I run out of food anymore, because now I'm uncertain if the food will be there when I need to go get it. So maybe I need to start stocking up on some things. And now you're giving a lot more thinking towards that. And other questions that you'd never had to answer before, like, do I need to keep my kids home so that they can be safe? Or am I comfortable with them being at school? Or do I need to leave my job and teach my kids? And then now you're talking very big life decisions. That's all like personal, but then what's going on at work, and how should my business respond to these challenges that we are now experiencing. Should I wear a mask personally? What's going on with my customers and how are they making decisions? So while all of this is going on, some of these things were on autopilot before. We have our normal business as usual, and I don't ever wear a mask because we don't have a pandemic. Well, system one is winning more of those other decisions. So I'm not going to be giving as many, system two is not going to be influencing as much of those decisions as they would have otherwise. So there's a reason why we don't have um, ice cream and donuts, for dinner every night. But fast food might be an easier choice for dinner more frequently. You know, the limitations we might be putting on our kids on screen time, we might be relaxing some things, and other things might be suffering because we're devoting so much more energy and fatiguing ourselves. But those questions are still needing to be answered. So how on earth are we going to answer these questions and while system one is winning all of these other decisions? And so we start coming down to certain frameworks. So what reference points are we using to try to tackle these big questions to begin with? And in the absence of those reference points, like I've never had to wear a mask before, well, excluding my time in the military, but I'm not in the military anymore, so it's not a thing. How much, what were your feelings regarding loss? Are you one to take more risks, or are you one to avoid all the risks? And where do you land on that spectrum? Possibly, informing what your initial reaction is here. But even that, like, I don't know how much risk I'm really averting by wearing a mask. I don't know how much risk there really is in the grocery store. And so, like, even that might not be particularly helpful. And then that's where we start coming to these biases and not even realizing that we're going to start answering some of these questions because of some kind of subconscious bias that is, taking control at this point. So there's a book called The Ostrich Paradox that I love because it really dives into why people underprepare for disasters. And they use the hurricanes as an example as to how to communicate these biases in a real world manner. And because that's something that is a very big threat, everyone can see it, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And so people don't all do the same things when it comes to hurricanes coming to shore. So why is that? So they land on 6 different biases that come into play here, and we'll go through the top 3. The other 3 are also, I think, fascinating. I had to pick 3, and this is just where I landed. But myopia, amnesia, and optimism we'll dive a little bit further into. So for the first one, myopia, so when you think about what do I have to do today, as opposed to what should I be doing today? And this myopic bias has more to do with like, I'm going to err on something that's easy to do today as opposed to something that is more difficult for me to understand. And I'll tackle that maybe in a little, I'll get to that shortly, which might be fine. I mean, these biases are there for a reason. There's a reason why we don't spend all of our days, just talking about long-term plans. We still have short-term things to shore up. In some cases, there's value, but in some other cases where it's going to potentially influence us into making decisions that aren't going to serve us well or serve us in the best way. And so um, you might start to think like it's not really, you might not realize you're thinking it's not worth the effort right now. But I will get back to it. And so the way that you can curb this is to change the approach so that whatever the investment is today is not so substantial to deter action. So that's why things like free trials, work so effectively, or we'll let you take the car home, or for the day. It's like, okay, I don't have to do too much work now, and I can just it's an easier decision to make. And so, what is that equivalent in the decisions that you're making and the decisions that your customers are making and the decisions that you are hoping that your customers will make? If they're very steep in cognitive load or complexity, how might you start to break it down so it's easier for them to start to tackle? The next one is amnesia. And so I think this one's funny because in talking in as a parent and sometimes talking to other parents, you tend to like oftentimes forget how difficult something was and remember only the highlights. Um, so amnesia is really forgetting too quickly what's really happened and only remember the good things, and you don't really remember the lessons learned. So when you look back at 2020, you might not remember all of the complexity that happened, how much there a challenge supply shortages were in different respects, where you could turn to get the actual facts of what's going on. And it's going back to the poll where we talk about checking the news. Um, yeah, how often were you either surprised at what your trusted news source was telling you and then caused you possibly to pivot to somewhere else? And we'll actually get a little bit more into other sources of information soon. But that to me is really interesting because in a situation where there's a lot of ambiguity, you may have to start pivoting, and that can create additional cognitive load and also create this sense of, I don't know what the right decision is. And we all want to feel like we're making smart decisions. We all want to have that peace of mind that what I'm doing is the right thing. And there's another piece as a business that we need to remember from last year is that how many things are on autopilot, this like zombie process that just is continuing to run, that in light of the pandemic needed to be stopped or altered. How many of those processes exist? And how are you going to remember to go back to readdress those in the event of the next big challenge, whether it's really the zombies or a different type of pandemic or a different kind of financial or customer challenge that they're facing. So understanding what's really going on in their environment and what they're what they're facing as far as an automated regular process from your company is crucial. So the tactic here is to correct those distorted memories, make sure that there is some kind of a mechanism to communicate, back to either your customers or even internally, like remember, and refer back to those lessons learned. Some of the things that we did, or that I did, was creating like the after action, kind of buttoning some things up so that I had all of my lessons learned. And even just 6 months later, and I've had to go back to some of those after actions, I'm remembering, oh my gosh, I forgot about that one thing that that took us like a week to recover from because of this, you know, this insight. So, and we can do something better next time that's not going to create that that complexity. So those kinds of things are going to be really helpful so you don't forget for the next go. Then we've got optimism and this idea that you know I'm going to be I'm okay because I can outrun the zombies. Well, the thing about zombies is they don't stop; they just keep coming. So eventually you'll tire and they'll get you, and then you'll be a zombie, and that's really sad. But really, just risk is a difficult topic for people to understand. To the extent, like with the hurricane example, knowing that okay, we're going to be okay because of a hurricane hasn't hit here in 50 years, or my house is great and it's built really well, or I did this one thing and we're going to be fine. But just underestimating how likely it is that you're going to suffer from something, from some risk that's on the horizon. And I really love this one clip from Mark Rober. He has a series of, and he has a whole channel devoted to engineering and science and research. He's the glitter bomb guy, if you saw those, but he has a clip on carnival games, and he goes a little bit more into the psychological component of why people participate in certain carnival games and which games are um, almost a scam, and pretty much. And he comes to this one on this ladder, which is near impossible unless you know the exact tactic and have probably practiced it. but understanding the physics behind it, it makes you like it makes you curious, like how on earth could anybody just tackle this and win with no practice? But the thing is, humans very typically overestimate their chances of success, and that's why you continue to see games like this at the carnival game, because it's like, ah, yeah, a ladder, I can do a ladder. That's simple. But just tying it at a single point on both ends completely changes it so that it's near impossible. So when it comes to optimism, we all have this going on. So how do we, what is the tactic here? Really looking at um, the grounding folks in reality and trying to make sure that you're not just scaring the bejesus everybody, but like really helping to bring the truth out and in ensuring people are um, understanding their true risk and impact so that it will cause them to take better action or make better decisions. So now we're going to take another poll. So considering the biases that we just went through, what do you feel is going to be the biggest barrier for your customer experience in a post-COVID and possibly pre-zombie environment? Is it going to be more of a, okay, we've come out of this, now we can get back to business and, just start executing to, getting our short-term wins back in order, as opposed to making more strategic investments to help us with the next big challenge? Forgetting, a lot of the things that went down in 2020, or being overly optimistic. So given the, or four, number four, all three. So given those options, let's see. Oh, Susan, I thank you for posting that clip on the Mark Rober. So 2, 4, 4, 3, 2, 4, 4, 4. So I see a lot of fours, so all three. Yeah, this is our first pandemic. It's a glib reference, but like how many people said it's our first World War? Just it's interesting by even phrasing it that way is it's almost expecting that there will be another one. But just the way that you phrased it implies that you're already thinking there will probably be another one. So I'm taking away that, Kathy, you're already on the mind that this isn't going to be the last time that we have to face something like this. Certainly not. Kathy's not suffering from optimism. So what I want to go to next is social influences, and I'd be remiss if we didn't come back to this. I talked a little bit about the topics that we're going to come back to with regards to information, and there is a lot when it comes to social influences, especially given a lot of the changes that have happened culturally, uh, well, worldwide when it comes to things like social media. But there's a lot of historical context as well. So when you consider communities and tribes and group identity, Malcolm Gladwell in one of his early works, so Malcolm Gladwell being a very like a best-selling author and economist, he is one of his early works is called Tipping Point, and in that book, he talks about how the size of people, the size of tribes, and anchoring around that number of 150. And once you get past that number, even going back and into our tribal times, they would splinter into new tribes, and it became um, too complex to maintain relationships within a group that got too big. And so 150 seemed to be like your bubble. The reason why I like that I find that interesting is that changes a little bit when it comes to the dynamic of having thousands of friends in social media, or thousands of connections on LinkedIn or other sources or other platforms. And to what extent are you connected to those groups? To what extent is your identity shaped by different groups? And really, it's that number of 150 probably isn't really that changed that much, but you are starting to see a little bit of everybody. But that doesn't mean that you're being influenced from all of those points of view. So when you look, so I never thought I'd reference Chris Rock in a presentation, but he had an opening monologue in October for Saturday Night Live that I actually really loved. I think he's a very funny comedian, but on a serious topic on reassessing relationships in the pandemic, he was talking about how like the friends you had might, before might not be the friends that you have after this, and the relationships you have with your family members, and where he was going was the relationship with government. But for the context here, our customers are going to be reassessing their relationships too, and it depends a lot on how their interactions are going and how we're helping them to make decisions. Being too heavy-handed, not being present, in some cases, not offering an opinion on a emerging social topic that may not have ever been touched before. So, there are unprecedented challenges facing businesses from that respect as well. But we have to know that our customers are going to be considering them. And in disrupting social norms, and that it's what we had as far as social norms before is becoming so much different. You can look at any pocket when it comes to your personal life, and the, you know, even just decisions on, kids' sports and whether they're going to participate. And then some of those other questions around like school and then just, having game night with your friends. All of those things are different. But then it also comes back to group identity, and what is normal within that group identity may be evolving because people in that group have different opinions on something that has never been faced by that group before. And so they may not be all on the same page when it comes to wearing a mask. They may not all be on the same page with whether the government is doing the right thing and whether the scientists, whether COVID is really a hoax or not. And so you start to see some differences there. Um, and then if you start to go back to, okay, well, my group being on social media, well, what am I being fed? If you haven't watched the documentary Social Dilemma, I highly recommend it because it goes a little bit more into detail as to how their algorithms work and why it might be influencing people in ways that are different than how we had been previously, in the way that it's feeding you things that you feel are or that the algorithm feels like you are interested, and things that are more extreme. So if you were, fairly middle of the road, maybe leaning slightly left or slightly right, being fed things that it thinks you're going to like, and then things that are further, on that spectrum, to the point that you feel like anybody on the other side, they're now even more extreme to you as they would have been before. Where why that matters is that you start to see less reciprocity. And so that like give and take type of feel, I'm going to give a little bit, you're going to give a little bit, and we'll compromise. Instead, more digging in of heels. So that can also put people in a position that they make an initial decision that they may have, in the past been open to making a different decision. But now that they're being reinforced differently and having this feeling that, well, I'm going to double down on this decision instead of being open to maybe I made a mistake and I need to be more careful or I need to do something different. We saw a lot of that happening last year. And finally, when it comes to authority, and going back to the very first poll question and looking at the news, you know, even in a single news, even if you're loyal to one news source, that one news source is probably going to refer to very different, people as far as sources of information. And so, and it's difficult sometimes even to understand, like, who do I trust? I've just been told three different things that sound totally contradictory. And so that is also creating a lot of mental like distress. And how am I going to make the right call here? And for all of us on the call, we are also a source of authority for our customers. So how are we coming across to them in a way that is going to help them make decisions and not in a way that it's going to create more distress and confusion. It's very tricky. And it can get even to the point where doing things that are intended to be a benefit, or like we're giving you back something of value, then it possibly being received in an unintended way, that it's going to be perceived negatively. So all of those things have to be present as you're making those decisions and how you're framing those things on behalf of your customers. So that brings us to our last poll. And this one is a little bit more personal. So this year, I said this year, I should have put last year, how were you impacted in your community or tribe? And so again, list as many of these things as you feel are relevant. Did it didn't affect any of your relationships? Your tribe pretty much was aligned with how your thinking was. Did it affect some of your personal or work relationships? Did you feel kind of like an oddball in the folks that you were mainly, that was your group, your tribe? Did you notice some people fall off the radar and just poof, they're gone? And on the other end, did you end up developing new relationships with people or strengthening something that you had as an acquaintance? So give folks a minute here to answer. Seeing a lot of sixes. That to me is interesting. And for me personally, I had a little bit of all of these. But I think number 6 is a big one. But to me, like that, I think is indicative of our awareness that we are recognizing we're different possibly, and we need to gravitate more toward the folks that that share our views. And that might affect some of our personal and work relationships. So here's the references page. I had a lot of things that went into this presentation. I want to give credit to where credit is due. There's a lot of resilience themes that kind of go underneath all of this. How are we going to be more resilient? And I didn't really dig into that as much, but that's all I wanted to share. Last is just good luck out there. Zombies, hopefully they're not really a thing, but if they are, well, now you know why everyone's gonna be making bad decisions.